From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, gang. Thank you to everyone who joined us in Dunkley last night. We know how much you enjoyed watching it at home. We absolutely loved it on this side of the telly. We'll be doing plenty more live shows in 2024 and beyond. It's nothing better than hanging out with normal people in normal parts of Australia, which in part is why we are so laser focused about what matters and about why the Canberra bubble within a bubble often doesn't actually understand where the real world is. Now, as you know, the Prime Minister believes he's someone we should always trust.
My word is my bond.
Only problem is Australians don't trust him. And it's not just me, it's not just you, it's a new poll which comes out via the Turnbull Times. The Guardian, the essential media organisation, the one that refused to tell us that the No campaign was starting to gather steam, and if they have concluded this, then alarm bells should be going off for the Prime Minister. The poll that they released today asked just how many people trusted the Prime Minister. In March of last year, it was 51% of people who said, yep, I'm all in. Well, now it's 37%. Just 37%, 1 in 4 voters, 4 out of 10 voters, who say that they trust the Prime Minister, and that's down 14%. Now, we all know why, but it's not just to do with the broken promise when it comes to tax. I'll explain some of the other things that have been happening in and around the polls that I think are moving the polls, but the rest of the political media just don't pay attention. And in part, that's because for some, they are committed to the narrative of the comeback kid in terms of the Prime Minister. For others, they're just simply too busy. But still, let's have a look here. Now, of course, the government is trying to tell us that they have fixed cost of living with a too little too late tax cut. Now, on the night that all of this happened, we didn't focus on the yearly number. We focused not even on the monthly number. We focused on the weekly number, because any tax cut should be divided down to how you pay it. And the way we pay our tax is how often we get paid. People get paid weekly, fortnightly or monthly, but you get paid per week to do a certain job. Therefore, forget all of the talk of 2,000 here and 4,000 there. The reality was $15 a week for people on $45,000. It's less in the seat of Dunkley, where it's just $14. 60,000 is 22, then 32 and 41. I keep showing you this because the people that are interested in forcing the narrative in and around Albo focus on the biggest number possible. The reality of the tax cuts is what people will end up seeing once they eventually pass the Parliament and they start kicking in from July the 1st. Now remember, as Sharry Markson reported, the Prime Minister told his MPs to go back across the country and say that this was the, and I quote, solution to cost of living. The reality, of course, is that it is nowhere near the problem of cost of living. This was all a response to opinion polls that said the best part of 80% of Australians think cost of living is the number one issue, and 70% of Australians said the federal government has not done enough. And of course, the reality is they have not. While on the one hand, it's $14 for the people of Dunkley, the reality was the same people are paying higher in petrol taxes. This government has absolutely refused to do anything about petrol taxes. Instead, under their watch, their decision, it goes up. The same when it comes to things like alcohol taxes, that famous bottle of Bundy that I've held up how many times? 63% of it is taxation. Not to mention new taxes on trucks moving things around, which of course makes everything else more expensive, and the big issue, power. That power is costing way more than it ever has in this country because this government is trying to get us to move from the system that works to the one that makes them seem better when they go to international conferences. And even then, in the end, Australia is 1% of global emissions. China, which can continue to double, repeat, double its pollution every single day, double tomorrow, double the next day, double the next day, double the next month. They can pollute the world as much as they want, and they're currently 30% of the world's problem. They can keep doing whatever they want under the Paris Accord that apparently we absolutely had to sign, where we have one hand behind our back. China can continue to pollute till 2030. Australia turns around and buys things like solar panels, which are made by slave labour in Chinese labour camps. But we feel better about ourselves because Twitter is happy, the ABC is happy. We're doing our bit. And as many have talked about, with Andrew Forrest turning up today in the Nationals party room, there ended up being a shouting match around all of this. We will talk about it with Matt Canavan. He was in the room. We'll get to that in a moment or two's time. He believes we should have a new super mega global amazing carbon tax that'll raise $100 billion a year. Who do you think will end up paying that? The customers of all of those companies. But let's look at where the government is, because we have multiple polls which all tell us the same thing. The government is either back to where it was the day it won the election in 2022, or it is lower. Newspoll says they've got a primary vote of 33, Resolve 34, Essential 30. So take your range, but basically it's in the low 30s. That's the lowest primary vote that the Labor Party has had in about a century. Compare this with the Liberal Party that still is below where it needs to be to guarantee an election victory, but geez, it's close. 40 is what they need. Resolve says they've got 37, Newspoll says 36, and Essential says 35. But it doesn't really matter. All you need to do is see that 3 in a row for Labor is down, 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 like the old Status Quo song where they use the Coles ad about prices down. And for the Libs, it's up, up, up a little, or significant numbers. But there's one report that I bet you didn't hear about today. Again, I don't know why. But did you hear today that on two-party preferred, the Essential poll, which is printed in the freaking Guardian, shows the Liberal Party is ahead on two-party preferred. Now, we have to see where the 4% of undecideds go. If they all go to Labor, then very obviously that ends up being enough for them to win. But if it's split 50-50, well, then we end up in a scenario of, essentially, 49 versus 50, and a narrow potential win for the coalition. Now, a lot of people have interpreted what these polls are, that they are Australians punishing the Prime Minister for telling a lie. I don't think that's the case. I think it's people realising that in the end, if they paid any attention at all, it's too little too late when it comes to the tax cuts. Everything is just as expensive as it was last year, but they tell us inflation is coming down, but it's still up compared to previous years and months, meaning we are still paying more, but they say, well, you're paying less of more. You're still paying more. They say, oh, interest rates will eventually come down. Well, even if that's the case, you'll still be paying 75% of the effect of the elbow dozen of interest rate rises since he became the Prime Minister. So, yes, the Prime Minister was able to successfully bamboozle the press gallery for the best part of a month to say, circuit breaker, circuit breaker. But here in the real world, people weren't listening, or if they were listening, they didn't buy it. They were able to divide by 52 the very big number that they were being told, and even then we all knew it wasn't enough. Now, another thing that I think actually moved the polls against the Prime Minister, and also on the matter of trust, is remember a couple of weeks ago when this was his reaction to an illegal boat arrival off Western Australia.
I've been travelling in the car, so I'm not. I haven't been advised about that.
Now, it's the sort of clunker that can be played on FM radio and is easy for people to understand, but people who already are starting to have trust issues with the Prime Minister now start to see what pollsters saw towards the end of last year, which is an incompetency at the heart of the government and the Prime Minister, that very obviously he ain't a details guy. He thinks that he has some personal connection, and when all else fails, people will trust Albo because Albo's one of us. But when it comes to his private jet use or his obsession with a freebie here, there and everywhere, we know he ain't one of us. He got a pay rise that was the biggest pay rise politicians have got in 10 years. He oversaw the biggest pay rise for public servants in 10 years. He seriously wants you to believe that his telephone doesn't work when he's driving in a car, or they're so incompetent that nobody rang him. Either way, that was a big event that happened in the past couple of weeks, and it was a reminder of what we were all told didn't matter during the election campaign, that this guy, well, maybe just is not across the detail. He's good at acting the part, but actually showing the nous to run the country, well, we all know what happened in the first days of the election campaign 2 years ago.
It's up to people to ask whatever questions they want. Andrew.
What's the national unemployment rate?
National unemployment rate at the moment, is, I think it's 5.4. Sorry, I'm not sure what it is.
Now, this is a sign that, again, we were told did not matter. It was a media obsession. And it didn't affect the result of the election. But if you want to have a look at where the polls are right now, well, take your pick. The Prime Minister has lied. The Prime Minister has not offered a solution when it comes to cost of living. He's pretending that he doesn't know about matters of national security. And, of course, he will use any opportunity to play with the rich and famous above the poor or normal every chance he gets. In fact, there was a very interesting piece which popped up in Seven West Media website from the former Australian newspaper editor, Christopher Dorr. And it gives us a real insight into some of the problems that Labor has. In fact, he has been able to peek behind the door, and a lot of people inside Labor land are not that thrilled with their current leader. Now, I'm not suggesting he's about to lose an election or lose the leadership, but this is interesting effort from Chris Dorr. The Nightly has spoken to senior leadership, cabinet ministers, MPs, strategists and advisors for this special series on the first 2 years of the Albanese government. One Labor MP, quote, "I don't think anyone knows how Albo responds to a decline in popularity and the wheels coming off. Labor colleagues blame hubris and the classic election night folly, that being to declare that they would have the voice referendum, the Uluru Statement in full, that he won and he believes it's because of him," an insider told Christopher Dorr. "So because I'm so popular, people love me. Overnight, the Australian culture has apparently changed and everyone is a lefty." Now, of course, that is not what happened at the last election. Now, I've shown you multiple times when I was trying to explain what may or may not happen with the voice, there is a very obvious divide between the number of voters that are over the age of 50 and those that are under the age of 50. Certainly, again, when you have a look at data, women aged 35 to 54, they certainly have walked away from the Liberal Party, but they're starting to come back until, of course, they're constantly reminded by the ABC that the Liberal Party has a problem with women. But at its heart, we've got a show pony for a Prime Minister. You can tell that this is a guy who does not do the homework, does not know the detail, does not know how to argue. Instead, he understands the politics. It's why, in part, I understand that he's particularly frustrated with certain parts of the media because they've called him out. And they've had to call him out because they've seen him wanting. Now, he is convinced, and the people around him who also say that he walks on water as the greatest Prime Minister of all time, and it's white privilege or it's racism as to why he was denied his space in history when it came to the voice. But you saw on a simple yes-no question his absolute inability to argue and persuade on a yes-no question. You can see that while they have a clever political line of a tax cut for everyone, when you actually look at the numbers, $15 doesn't change anyone's life, no matter how patronising a politician is who wants to tell them that they have. Our experience in Dunkley last night showed that there are multiple frustrations people have, including with people like Chris Bowen telling them what car to drive, Linda Burney saying that if you didn't agree with her on The Voice, then it's all misinformation, believing that if the government's doing the wrong thing and you seek to oppose it, then you're nothing but the champion of no. Again, my feeling, my gut feeling, my educated guess about the next election is that we're having a conversation between a Labor majority and a Labor minority. Just how big that minority will be will shape what the next 3 years are. What happens after that? Well, anyone's business. And I'm not stupid enough to say that even that is inevitable because, as I told you in 2019, as you responded in 2019, nothing was inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. Elections are always a bit of a shock here or there, but something that can't be hidden from is how the Prime Minister is performing and how, when people are looking for, well, hang on, sorry, isn't there supposed to be a bounce from the tax cut? They're completely ignoring the moment where he pretended his phone didn't work. Or we're supposed to believe that his office is so incompetent that they didn't try to call him about a boat turning up. People notice this stuff. And while the Canberra bubble is all obsessed with today's press release and today's announcement and who said what in question time. In the real world, there are just little moments that pop up here and there that give you an insight into the character of the people who lead our country. And we've seen plenty of elbow that we don't like. Meantime, as you know, I am quite sensitive to the idea that this government is seeking to censor the internet. Now, of course, the reason they are doing so is because the left have a word that they love to use for anyone who puts up an argument that they disagree with.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
So this federal government is seeking to censor the internet by going after misinformation. They are going to try to give new powers to the Australian Communications and Media Authority to be able to hand out very significant fines to social media companies that do not remove what the Australian Communications and Media Authority, otherwise known as the government, believes is acceptable in the public discourse. Now, we've seen this before when powers were not that significant, but still thousands of tweets just magically disappeared during the COVID pandemic. We've seen misinformation being the reason why the pregnant lady was arrested in her house during the COVID lockdowns. But there is plenty of people who have serious concerns about what this government is planning to do, including the lefties over at the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission is saying that the misinformation bill actually is going after the freedom that it aims to protect. Everyone from churches to universities, media organisations and plenty in between know what is going on here, which is, put simply, what the government doesn't like, they are able to label as misinformation. If you share it on social media, then the social media platform must be punished. Therefore, silence. Silence of dissent. And why do I know that this is the intent of the legislation? Because we're seeing exactly that game play out right now. Casanova Bowen, of course, is trying to tell us that there will be no cars that will be banned from being on sale in Australia, despite the fact that he's introducing a sliding scale that will slowly but surely mean that fewer cars that are big and bulky will be able to be sold in Australia, let alone in states and territories like the ACT, where they're saying that unless it's an electric vehicle, you can't sell it into the 2030s. Yet Chris Bowen thinks you're stupid. So he turns around and says garbage like this.
Car companies can continue to import any particular model they wish. No model will be mandatory, no model will be banned.
But everyone knows the detail that's coming from the car companies about the sliding scale that slowly but surely will rule out, among others, the two most popular cars in the country, the Nissan D-Max Ute, the Toyota Hilux, not to mention a big chunk of what Ford sells, and as we've shown you before, multiple companies will just not have cars available under the new standard because while they're not banning cars, they're just introducing essentially a brand new scheme that says you must be this tall to ride the roller coaster, then this tall, then this tall, then this tall. We're not banning anyone. We're just making sure that the roller coaster is for the shortest people amongst us. But back to disinformation. Here was some of the back and forth in Parliament today.
I refer to Labor's new family car and ute tax. In my home state of Victoria in 2023, 78% of sales were either SUVs or light commercial vehicles and utes. The top-selling cars were the Ford Ranger, Toyota Hilux and the Isuzu D-Max. Industry analysis shows that they would attract penalties of up to $17,000, $14,000 and $13,000 respectively by 2029. Why does this Labor government want to punish Aussie families and tradies for their choices?
Fair question, but pay attention to one of the teals. They used the M word about that question.
Standing Order 100, questions must not contain statements of facts unless they can be authenticated, nor containing hypothetical matter. The question is based on a false premise, and we should not be spreading disinformation in this chamber in questions or answers.
So you see, because the government says there'll be no victims, there are no victims. Because the government says there'll be no bans, you can't say there are bans. Because the government says that there will be no increase to cars in order to pay the penalties for the emissions of those cars, it doesn't exist. Because they name the legislation being about misinformation, that it's not at all about censoring the internet. That's why I have huge concerns about what this government is planning to do. You see, what they really want to do is that the arguments that you are watching right now, that are based on data, that are based on reasoning, that yes, have a worldview, but if they don't follow the exact script of the press release that the minister released, it would be called misinformation. You wouldn't be able to share it. Because if you did share it, then Facebook, Twitter, X, Threads, or whatever you like to communicate with your friends and family on, well, they would be fined for hosting what the government doesn't approve of. Oh, but it's nothing to do with media companies. Pull the other one, it plays jingle bells. When the Human Rights Commission and Sky News Primetime are in the same place, then it's a bad law. It should be reduced, it should be removed, it should not take place. But you saw before your very eyes how it would be weaponised. And remember, under this system, nobody even needs to complain about an example of misinformation. It would be up to a bureaucrat working for the Australian Communications and Media Authority to just start an investigation. Oh yeah, and the minister has the power to start an investigation as well. So could you imagine Chris Bowen knocking on the door of the Communications Minister saying, all that stuff about the ute tax, all that stuff about a big car ban, that's misinformation, because what we're really doing is fuel standards. Communications Minister picks up the phone, says to ACMA, can you double check that? Bureaucrat, who is probably in agreement with the government policy, turns around and says, yep, that's misinformation. Message goes to social media company, and because they're all based in the United States, they go, OK, cool, just kill it off. And as will free debate in the country. Don't say you're not warned, ring your local senator, because they're the ones that are going to be deciding this, and let's see what happens. Meantime, again, thank you so much to everyone who turned up to our pub test in Dunkley. It was really fun. I love getting in front of normal people. Revving people up in a room is really fun. I also really enjoyed being able to get the differing perspectives of people from the Liberal Party, the Libertarian Party, the old Liberal Democrats Party, and the bloke from the Australian Democrats, who was sort of giving it a bit of a lefty spin. I hated that the Labor Party decided to sit it out, as did, of course, the Greens, but it was good to see people asking questions. I also loved a live audience when there was a bit of biffo towards the end of the show on Paul Murray Live. I promise we'll be doing that again later in the year. That's a great idea. We're doing the studio audience shows, I promise you. They'll be really cool to watch. But as we know, things are getting tighter by the hour in Dunkley. The assumption that the Labor Party would win relatively easily, 52 to 48, has now completely flipped to polls suggesting that the Liberal Party could end up winning this thing. The Prime Minister was out there talking about it's the size of the swing that matters. Now, obviously, if the swing is anything under 3%, i.e. they're able to hold on to the seat by 3.5, by 4, by 5, by 5.5, that's bad news for the Libs, no question. But once we start to get under 3 to 2.5 or 2 or 1.5 or even going off to postals, then that's obviously going to be bad for the government, let alone losing the seat completely. But again, what would be driving a last-minute change when it comes to Dunkley? Now, the Labor Party wants this all to be about remembering a good local MP who sadly died of cancer. But this is an opportunity for an electorate that's going to get just $14 a week in too little too late tax cuts to say to the Labor Party, $14 is too little too late. It does nothing when it comes to inflation. To the people who want to drive a ute or an SUV, before it's banned as misinformation to talk about it in the Parliament or on the internet, perhaps this is an opportunity for you to send a message back to the Labor Party, hey, pull your head in, I'll choose my car, thanks, not you. And then there are the comments of the Labor candidate who, back when she was working, I think, in the TAFE sector, not thinking she'd be running for office anytime soon, well, she was just part of the lefty group of people that were whinging after Australia said hell no to the Voice. Remember, 60-40 yes was turned into 60-40 no. Her comments, which had been highlighted by Rita Panahi, but I will gladly repeat them here because you need to know. Her view of an electorate that voted like 55% no was that it was an act of white privilege to do so. That's who you'd be electing, a hard left MP. I feel so many heavy emotions because of the display of what I can only describe as the worst white privilege in the country. She's, of course, talking about her own electorate. Her own electorate voted no. Her own electorate wants to drive SUVs. Her own electorate is having troubles when it comes to cost of living. So while, again, the same people who applaud Albo for everything he would do and tell him that he's never put a foot wrong, those are the same people that are advising the candidate who didn't turn up last night. Now, again, she could have been asked a tough question. She could have rolled her eyes because I was the person hosting it, but the people in the room are the people who are voting on Saturday. And they saw that she wasn't there. And I know plenty of people who didn't even watch the show last night heard that she decided not to turn up. Is that going to be the ultimate factor in Dunkley? No, but it is going to be part of the issue. Because sometimes people who don't back themselves in every situation end up in no situation. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Full coverage here from 6 p.m. Full election night style coverage with, among others, Peter Credlin, Stephen Conroy and plenty of others here Saturday night on Sky News. Now, for obvious reasons, you know that Scott Morrison has given us an incredible insight into how politics works. When he was the shadow immigration minister arguing to stop the boats, into when he became the immigration minister and how he stopped the boats, into when he became the treasurer and put together rolling tax cuts for companies and for individuals, and then, of course, as the Prime Minister, all the way from Washington, DC to the Shire. We were given an inside seat into how politics works, and in part because we didn't jump down his throat. We let him say what he wanted to say, and you can make whatever judgment you want after that. But you know how hostile and how ridiculous the media became, because remember, his ultimate sin was winning the 2019 election, proving the Liberal Party did exactly the right thing by getting rid of the ghost in 2018. I noticed, by the way, the ghost turned up on Q&A last night and no one cared. But Scott Morrison gave his final speech in federal parliament today, and again, I want you to hear what he had to say, not just 5 seconds of what he had to say. This is what he said about community and the community of which he comes from. This sounds exactly like you and me talking about where we live, right?
Mine is a community that is unashamedly proud of our country, that deeply values family life and what it takes to live a life that keeps families together, that works hard. They take responsibility for themselves. They appreciate and respect both their own and others' good fortune. And they're generous to those around them, celebrating their successes or providing a hand up whenever and wherever it is needed.
He also talks about what matters in public life.
Too often in this place, we confuse differences of policy with judgments about people's intent and motives. This is not good for our polity. We may disagree, but we need to honour the good intentions of all of us.
Absolutely correct. Even the people that I vehemently disagree with, I don't think are bad human beings. I don't think they're not loved by their families and not good mates to their friends. But obviously, when particularly the left, that's what they think of us because we disagree with them, or sometimes we literally stand in their way saying, sorry, no revolution today. And finally, he talks about Judeo-Christian values, the stuff that is built into the DNA of our country. And increasingly, as people move away from faith, and you know that I am one of those people, but as we move away from faith and it is replaced by a sort of need to find a local deity via Twitter, that has a problem in a modern country like ours.
We stand on the values that build a successful, free society. Individual liberty, the rule of law, equality of opportunity, responsible citizenship, morality, liberty of speech, thought, religion and association. All of these stem from the core principle of respect for individual human dignity. So does representative democracy and even market-based capitalism. This is a unique Judeo-Christian principle, but equally we should be careful about diminishing the influence and the voice of Judeo-Christian faith in our Western society, as doing so risks our society drifting into a valueless void. In that world, there is nothing to stand on. There is nothing to hold on to, and the authoritarians and autocrats win. So in the increasing Western embrace of secularism, Let us be careful not to disconnect ourselves from what I would argue is our greatest gift and most effective protector of our freedoms, the Judeo-Christian values upon which our liberty and society was founded. Even if you may not believe, it would be wise to continue to understand, respect and appreciate this important link and foundation.
Well said. Thank you for your service. We will take a quick break and back with more, including a great debate, in fact a big debate which is going to be around now. We're going to have none other than Matt Canavan, plenty of news around him today, the great James Morrow and the wonderful Nicholas Rees. Get ready, more in a sec. Thank you very much. He's doing the air guitar, which is very nice to see. James Morrow, our colleague here at Sky News. You can find him in the Telegraph as well. Rock and roll, baby. All right, Nicholas Rees is always just humming a rock and roll tune at any point in time. A little bit more progressive rock and occasionally some hottest 100. But okay, fair enough. Still, he's got
Taylor
some rock and roll
Swift
in
too. Taylor Swift.
Well, enough. We're going an hour without talking about it. And Matt Canavan, oh goodness me, the trained economist who knows the difference between mean and average. You are such a bad man. We'll get to you and gender pay stuff in a second, but fair dinkum. Anyone who, by the way, missed Peter Credlin's great takedown of that report today, please go and see it at skynews.com.au because she explains all of the methodology and the difference between average and mean. Good editorial as always. Check it out, skynews.com.au. So let's just take 30 seconds here to have a look at the map and the fact that the Prime Minister is not trusted by people. Now, we were told relentlessly by the bubble inside the bubble that trust doesn't matter, you can break a promise, especially when it's a great promise that results in $14 a week tax cuts for the people of Dunkley. But then also, we saw the Prime Minister, when the boat arrived, my phone didn't work, right? And I reckon, James, that on top of the car thing, there's just a lot of moments where people start to go, I know what this guy's about. And even The Guardian is saying he's had a 14-point drop down to about 37% of people who trust him.
Yeah, well, and I'm not surprised by any of that because especially after the Stage 3 tax cut, and he thought that he landed that, right? He thought, I got away with this. People like it. People like that.
I won the press club.
I won the press club.
I won everyone.
And I won that $14 a week for a lot of people, And I tell you what, $14, I was down at my local, the Salisbury Hotel in Stanmore. Hi, everybody, the other day. And I got a scooter VB, and it was $12.50. Yeah. So it's like $14 in this economy. Lovely, but come on. But, his thinking, of course, it was so clear. It was, people are going to forgive me because politicians lie. But once you've done that, you've broken the whole magic around. I'm a different sort of politician. Yeah. I am going to be honest with you. I'm never going to lie to you and all that. And so he's suddenly broken that, and he's just like everybody else. And the problem is, once he's just like everybody else, he gets back to the problem that he's just Albo. And that's frankly not a great place for him.
Well, and Nicholas, let's go deep, right? 2019 Labor Party review into why they lost. In part, they came up with the idea that they had to attack Scott Morrison from 2019 on and turn him into just another politician, right? Because if you're able to break that somewhat special bond that leaders have on the day they win an election, then you're able to get back in the fight. Now, Albo thinks that he has a special bond with the people of Australia, but the reality is that has now been broken and he's just the same as every other politician.
Look, I do think the honeymoon is over for the Albanese Labor government. Like, they're 2 years into office now. It's probably not surprising that the shine is coming off. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. And look, I do acknowledge that Dutton's numbers have been steadily improving for 12 months now. And I do think Labor, to be careful to not fall into the trap of going into the next election sort of seeing Dutton as a caricature. They need to really be more sophisticated in how they take him on. But, Paul, you cannot say that today's Essential poll is a good set of numbers for Peter Dutton. The most revealing thing to me was a couple of unconventional questions they asked people. Yes. Like, who would you expect to be more likely to stop and help you if your car broke down? Well, of course, there's a 10% lead to Anthony Albanese on this question. And the one I loved is, who would you prefer to have babysit your children? Albanese had an 11-point lead on that, Paul. So when you ask people, to compare Albanese to Dutton, Albanese is still way out in front.
Look, I'll tell you, those polls all show that no matter what the stupid question, 40% of people didn't care, all right, about either on all of that. But, you know, good luck if that's the straw that you're going to hold on to. There's a big amount of weight that you got on that straw, but good luck. Now, Matt, let's get to gender pay, right? Because I think the car thing is also another big issue about why they are where they are, but we'll talk about that in a different way in a second. So, you caused the sky to fall in because you pointed out one of the fatal flaws of the report which has been put forward, which is it's not about the average pay of men versus women, it's the median pay in an organisation, which means CEO, cleaner, in the middle, now compare boys versus girls. That in and of itself is not what the report is purporting to be, of course, either in the way the government presents it or the media reported it. You pointed this out and, oh my God!
Well, it's a whole hill of nonsense. There are so many flaws in this report. It is a completely useless report. And as you say, the headline figures of these reports are repeated breathlessly, as if they're gospel, when they don't compare like-for-like jobs. They don't compare apples for apples. They lump part-time work in with full-time work. I mean, the ABS doesn't do that. They split out different types of workers when they report wage details. And why do we have this agency? We've already got a statistical agency called the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and if we want to collect this sort of data, why don't we just ask them to do it? What has become clear over the years is that the Workplace Gender Equality Agency has an ideological agenda, and it's taxpayer funded. Your taxpayer funds. It gets me very angry that we are wasting taxpayer dollars on such nonsense. It's total and utter nonsense. And then on top of that, Paul, if it does have any real world effect, it does perpetuate these ridiculous diverse and equity and inclusion policies in corporate workplaces, which do just breed resentment among especially young men. And I see it with young people all around me these days who are attracted to the poisonous ideologies of Andrew Tate and his ilk. Yep. It is perpetuated by this nonsense. Why don't we just... Well, if there is a problem with women being paid less, let's identify who is doing that and take them to court, because that is illegal. That's what we should be focused on, not dividing our society into genders, into races, into all of these different artificial categories which do nothing but divide us.
Yeah, see, James, when I saw this, again, another little penny drops, right? In the same way they went after the Reserve Bank governor as the individual who was the one creating interest rates, as opposed to the government not actually doing anything with its policies, they were able to divert attention and responsibility from themselves. If they can produce a list of evil, moustache-twirling billionaire companies, then everyone jumps on Twitter and says, boycott, insert, right? But there's a couple of things here. Language matters, right? Yes. And I do want to harp a little bit on average versus mean, right? Which is, you've got the Greens who don't know the difference between turnover and profit. You've got the left who don't know the difference between equity and equality. And you're in this scenario where these reports are really playing to people, thinking these words are all interchangeable. They're not.
Well, no, they're not. As you said, I mean, there's so many things that people do and they play with language. You know, it's the same sort of thing, you know, rich versus wealthy, all of these sorts of things. And people equate all sorts of things. And the point of all of this stuff is to muddy the language, to not be precise, Paul, and that is to sow division between different groups that people can then lever against one another. I think the point that Matt makes about, you know, Andrew Tate is really a good one here, but I think there's a broader point too, is that do we really need to start, you know, creating this whole sort of war of the sexes, battle of the sexes, rather than looking at, and you know what they don't want to be looking at? They don't want to be looking at the fact that household incomes in this country have shifted backwards by 6.1%, much more than any other OECD country. So, you know, they're not talking about that. They're saying, oh, but women are getting dudded because the big evil men, and then everybody's got to go do the hair shirt thing. You know, and I'm with Matt. You know, if you've got two people who've got 10 years experience in the same job and you're paying one $20,000 more than the other one, absolutely that's wrong. Don't do that. But you can deal with that. But this sort of stuff, this is distraction from the way everybody's living standards in this country are going backwards, and the growth rate that is projected for us for the next 20 years, 2.2%. Other countries are going to beat us. We're going backwards relative to other countries. This is the real scandal that we need to be looking at seriously in this country.
So you know, Nicholas, again, easy ways to dismiss this conversation and the points being made. Oh, it's four blokes talking about... Okay, whatever. But here's the deal. It is already illegal to pay people for the same job a different amount of money based on their age. So where's the federal government turning around and saying, well, we're going to police this more, we're going to send people more notices. If they don't change their ways, then we'll take them off to the appropriate authority. Otherwise, they're just basically saying, Twitter, sick 'em.
Well, look, I've got to say I completely disagree with this conversation up until this point. I mean, like Matt, I've got an economics degree as well, specialised in economic statistics, so I know the difference between
average, right?
mean. Well, no, you're confused on that point, Paul. Mean and average are the same thing. I think you're trying to say median and average. They're different. The mean is the numbers divided by the number of values. The median is when you take the total set of data and go to the middle point. And the mode is the number that comes up the most. So
shall we bring out the whiteboard?
Got those things confused. But the point is, when there's a 22% difference in wages between men and women in the workforce, and when you can compare different businesses in different sectors and see that there are discrepancies that exist between different companies in the same sector, you can see that there's clearly some big problems that persist in certain companies in Australia. And so I do think the fact that this is all getting published now is a good thing. Because it's not acceptable in modern day Australia that we
answer Matt's question. Matt, ask a question.
Okay, riddle me this. If women are paid 20% less, why can't I start a business and just employ women, save 20% on my labour costs and undercut the rest of the competition? Why aren't there examples of businesses doing this? So, I mean, if you're right that women are being paid 20% less, wouldn't that be a great strategy for any business? Clearly it's not. Clearly that doesn't work because this data is nonsense. And in fact, the Nobel Prize winner of economics last year got the Nobel Prize for proving the gender pay gap is largely a myth, that most of the pay gap is explained by the differences, especially differences in travel, in risk, in danger of different jobs. I mean, it's a very well-established econometric fact that there's just no real evidence here for a large gender pay gap in Western countries. This data doesn't provide any insight into that question, none at all.
Nicholas?
And it's just simply a talking point
I disagree with you on that point. Well, again, time and time again, you look across businesses and you see that those people in the top quartile of earners in businesses tend to be men. And so we've got to look at these businesses and say, OK, how do we give more opportunities for women to get into those top quartile of earners in business? What I was pleased to see, though, Matt, was that the investment bankers did far worse than the mining industry or the construction sector. So, you know, your beloved resources sector are no longer the bad boys when it comes to gender, or at least on the issue of gender pay. It's the investment bankers that got the dunce card in that regard.
Hypocrisy,
James,
hypocrisy does benefit. Hypocrisy does.
James can finish this off here, and then we're off to a break.
Oh, look, I just think that you know, to keep fighting about these sorts of things and exercising these divisions in society needlessly when we're all going backwards, it is just so irresponsible.
Fair point. All right, quick break. Back with plenty more to talk about, including the word misinformation and the want to censor the internet. All about, of course, the reality of what this government's planning to do with cars. A little bit of Dunkley, some surprises, and even some Mary Poppins. More in a sec. Big debate tonight. Nicholas Rees, James Morrow, Matt Canavan. Let's talk about a Supreme Court ruling out of Queensland that the vaccination mandates, which have meant that thousands of people haven't been able to even now go back to their jobs in the public service in Queensland, including people working as teachers, AMBOs and police officers. Well, that's now been struck out. Common sense, well, not very common, and takes a bloody long time to actually kick in. Matt, the idea that this has taken 4 years to get us to a place where, for obvious reasons, you choose to have or not have this thing, we are way past the time when people should still be being forced to have it, but it takes a court in Queensland to finally tell us what we all knew 4 years ago.
Yeah, look, it is bittersweet, Paul, bittersweet for the people's lives who have been destroyed in the last couple of years. Vindication, but justice delayed is justice denied. A lot of people have had their lives just thrown completely to the wind by losing their jobs for their own free choice. I did cross the floor a couple of years ago to try and stop this madness. I was vilified at the time by the press. And look, so it is good that we finally got there. Just to explain the situation to your viewers too, that still today, while the police officers, the police service do not require a vaccine to get a job, the police commissioner has, until this ruling, I suppose, decided that any police officer that refused to get a vaccine at the time that the mandate was enforced is not allowed to have their job back because they disobeyed an order. from the police commissioner is absolutely absurd at a time when crime is out of control in Queensland, and there are big billboards all over our cities trying to desperately get people to join the police force. And there are people that are refused entry to the police force because they just aren't up to date with their boosters. It is the most absurd thing you've ever heard. And look, there has to be now a Royal Commission. There must be a Royal Commission into the broader decisions that were made here, because the vaccine mandates here in these services are only one tip of the iceberg of what the human rights abuses that occurred through COVID. We must have a Royal Commission, and there must also clearly be compensation for those people who were sacked illegally. The court has found that these dismissals were illegal, and they should be compensated for that.
Surprise, surprise, taxpayer pays again. In fact, you're absolutely right about the COVID Royal Commission. Bloke came up to me last night in Dunkley, saying in Frankston, saying, please keep talking about it. Both of my parents died, and they died alone. I want to be heard, and that's in part exactly what that Royal Commission would do. Now let's talk a bit of Dunkley and expectations games. James, it is fascinating to watch here because the Libs don't want to say we're going to win, because if they don't, then they look stupid. Labor's turning around and saying we're probably going to win, but it might be tight, in the hope that if it is a big swing, it doesn't really matter. What's your sense of what feels to be a closing race? But we'll see what happens on Saturday.
It does feel like a closing race, especially after that YouGov poll, Paul. But, I do think the expectations game is fascinating here. I think it was Dennis Shanahan who had a very good analysis of how Albanese was saying, well, the average swing against the government in this sort of thing is, I think, 7%. So anything better than that, that's actually a win. And we all know that that's not going to be a win. And we know that things are going to start getting nervous in the party room if it's not a big convincing win. The scene is really interesting because it's kind of got a couple of different bits to it. So it's a
lot of
real
warfare at one end and a lot of mansions at the other.
And there's a few interesting issues kicking around there, including these 20-story towers and density. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating outcome here. And I think it's going to be closer, but I think I do think Labor holds on to it.
Yeah. Nicholas, what's your sense? What are people saying inside now? Obviously, we'll be able to work out whether you're managing expectations or just telling us what your gut's telling you. What's your sense of Dunkley?
So, look, I mean, you're absolutely right. Both sides of politics are out trying to do a lot of expectation management today. And so, Albanese's out there talking about the average swing of 7% against Labor. So if they manage to hold the seats on 6.7%, then it's a big win. I do think Peter Dutton has got a lot on the line here, though. I mean, you would think he should be going really close to snatching this seat. You know, we all know by-elections are hard for governments on a seat. Well, I mean, I would have thought the Libs would be, hoping to pick up the seat, frankly.
So anything other than a win?
You typically...
So now anything other than the win. I'm just setting what the talking point is. Anything but a win in a 6% seat.
No. Well, I mean, they hold the seat by, is it 6.3%? And I reckon if there's a 6% swing and Labor holds it, Albo will say, Duts, you can have the swing and I'll have the seat. Thank you very much. I mean, remember in Victoria, the Coalition has 10 out of 39 seats. They've got to be winning seats like Dunkley if they're going to have a credible pathway
I don't disagree, but if the swing is 6
so
of 6.3,
anything short of a win for Dutton is a big problem.
Will be pushing bricks. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And remember, this is a very typical seat. Like, there are a lot of seats like Dunkley out there across the big cities of Australia.
If this was in Queensland or New South Wales, this would have been a win. This would be a win absolutely for the Libs. I'm putting that one out there right now. And also the far left of the Labour Party are not campaigning because they have got the almighty you-know-whats with Albo over Israel. So.
But, she's all about white privilege when it comes to her own electorate.
Yes.
The Voice. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Senators, future senators, forever reporters. Thank you very much. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Who doesn't love Mary Poppins? Well, apparently there is a major controversy and it's all to do with this moment in the film.
We've been attacked by Hottentots! Aye, sir. Cheeky devils!
What's happening as a result of the outrage? Well, the late debate will tell you right now. See you tomorrow night with our special guest, Megan Kelly.